This interview is brought to you by Nutanix. The Nutanix platform drives government innovation by harnessing enterprise AI, simplifying VM container convergence, enhancing resilience and security for critical apps and data, and operating efficiently at scale across edge, private, public, and hybrid clouds. Nutanix, transforming today's technology for governments tomorrow.
Hey everyone, I'm Sarah Seibert, Managing Editor with GovCIO Media and Research, and joining me today is Young Bang, the former Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology from the Army. Thank you for joining me today.
Sure, thank you for having me.
Yeah, so to kick things off, what are some of the biggest challenges that Army faces in integrating commercial AI technologies into defense systems?
Yeah, great question. I think if you look at the advancements of AI, even in the past 6 months, let alone the past couple of years, there's huge amounts of advancements, and if you think about the potential applicability of how we can actually automate with agentic AI, a lot of the menial tasks that really takes a lot of workforce.
Right.
As you know, the Army is going through a series of reductions in budget as well as in personnel, even from the general level all the way down to the soldier level. So really, I think it's a ripe opportunity to think about how can agentic AI and how can AI replace some of the menial, redundant, repetitive tasks so that actually soldiers can shift to focus on operational things or the analyst or kind of the areas that soldiers know how to do exquisitely well. And I think that's a great opportunity for commercial industry to really help the government and the Army specifically think about that. So a lot of times industry will say, hey, I have this cool widget, I have this great algorithm that can do Y. But again, taking the next step to help the Army think about, well, how can we extend that to really do this mission so we could free up the soldiers' time to do more operational things? I think that's really a great opportunity for industry to really help out.
Right, and you kind of alluded to this, but bringing in those technologies, reducing some of the regulations to drive efficiency. There's been a lot of charge with the current administration looking at modernizing acquisition. So how should the Defense Department modernize acquisition to keep pace with some of these emerging technologies, particularly with AI?
Yeah, so I mean, everyone saw, when Secretary Hegseth came in, he pushed the whole notion of, accelerating acquisition and driving the software pathway,
right,
which I think is amazing. We were doing that in the Army in the last administration, and we shifted everything in the software pathway so we could actually get software out really quickly, right? So anywhere between, 3-week sprints and, first implementations in 6 months. And having that up tempo is critical for commercial to bring all their capabilities. Now, having said that, for the AI side, the cycle in AI and the algorithm development and the training goes way faster. And so I do think that looking at the software acquisition pathway may be an area that they explore. We were talking about having a subpath in the software acquisition pathway specifically for algorithms. Whether they do that or maybe create a separate acquisition pathway for algorithms, I think that's critical because the speed in which algorithms are trained and deployed are way faster. So you can literally train an algorithm overnight. And so most of our acquisition pathways can't keep up with that pace. And so I do think that there needs to be something set aside. Hopefully this administration can pilot something to say, hey, this should be a new pathway for acquisitions for our algorithms.
Right, yeah, that would be exciting. So as we look at AI and machine learning, how do you see those technologies playing a role in improving logistics and supply chain management within the Defense Department?
Yeah, I think that's a ripe opportunity as well. If you think about commercial, they've been using algorithms already to think about, just in time or optimizing shipping so that, once you get the order at point of sale, it goes right to the point of manufacturing and you can do delivery. And so there are already use cases that the commercial side have already really optimized it. And so I kind of look at it in multiple dimensions. So let's take a lot of the algorithms that have already been developed on looking at, manufacturing, logistics, supply chain, those type of things, and optimize our current operations at the enterprise, meaning at point of manufacturing and point of storage. The other area is really the operational. So if you look at a AOR or area of responsibility like Indo-PACOM in the Pacific, right? huge amounts of water. And so how does algorithms, which is actually really perfect for this, optimize the delivery mechanism, right? So, or the transportation associated with that, right? So if we have huge amounts of ships that are actually going to transport, that takes a little bit of time. And then being able to go back and forth and optimizing the efficiency of that is going to be critical. And so you have the enterprise, you have the operational or the transportation portion. And the last portion I always talk about is the tactical mile, which really hits the Army specifically and the Marine Corps. And we're really at the point of the spear. And so it's really about how do you really shorten that last tactical mile and delivery. And so we've been doing a lot of proof of concept and experimentations on, drone delivery, right? So
right, yeah.
I know Amazon and Jeff Bezos, when he was in there, was talking about drone delivery. The Army and a lot of our sister services with other countries in the Pacific have already been experimenting in that space. So when you tie the tactical mile, the operational, and then kind of point of manufacturing and supply together, I think that becomes the whole use case. And again, I think industry is very well positioned to help us in that.
Yeah, that's a perfect transition into my next question about use cases. So what are some of the most exciting use cases you're seeing in this space?
I think if you've seen, I think Google, Microsoft has published like 600 some odd use cases that they've seen in their client set individually. I think there's other organizations that have actually published their own use cases and playbooks. I think a lot of those can apply even to the DoD at the enterprise level or like corporately. And then also the DoD and services have actually published a series of their own use cases specifically.
Right.
I think it really remains to be seen as the President and the Secretaries of Defense and each of the services really reiterate some of their priorities. You'll see the use cases being refined. But some of the things that, one of the things that I have a passion project on is like, if you, at some point, hopefully there will be a ceasefire in Ukraine, right? And at some point, if you think about the warfare that's going on, there has been a dramatic shift in how the Russians are deploying drones and how they're actually now deploying landmines and unexploded ordnance. And so if you think about OEF and OIF back in Afghanistan and Iraq, a lot of the IEDs were actually injuring a lot of our soldiers, right? And so if you think about how they're using drones overnight to drop mines now, right, the landscape changes overnight. And so I do think people aren't thinking about that as much now, but if we're going to have a ceasefire, it'll take over 20 years to clear the landmines in Ukraine. And Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe. And for them to go back to that, we're going to need AI and other capabilities using drones to really identify and clear those faster. And I think something like that is going to be important because, one, from a peacekeeping and force protection perspective, but then also now if you think about the way the Russians are deploying the drones and mines overnight, that impacts the Army's ability to maneuver. And so what I look at that is that traditionally is force protection, but now if you think about a ability for drones and using computer vision and those type of things to actually enable maneuver for our soldiers, that's something that we have to really think about, right? Just like everyone's talking about UASs and counter UASs, the landmine and the counter landmine portion, I think, is a ripe opportunity that is actually starting to get a lot of traction because we're seeing so many in the proliferation of landmines in Ukraine.
We're at Nutanix NEXT in Washington, D.C. So as we're talking about some of these innovations, where do you see industry and federal partnerships playing a role in advancing some of these technologies?
Yeah, I think, especially with the technology that's coming out, Silicon Valley and, the defense tech companies, as well as commercial companies have done a great job really pushing in their technologies into the DoD. And I think we need to keep up with that. And the DoD has to be more receptive and more open to enable that. And so I think continuing that and extending the communications is important. But now that we've seen a lot of these technologies in our proof of concepts and prototyping working, I think the opportunity for public-private partnership is in the ability to think about how do we scale these capabilities, right? So once you take AI, then you tailor it to the mission, you can get it validated from proof of concept. Then you want to mature that to a prototype. And then once you have a prototype, you want to be able to scale that, right, from a volume perspective instead of like tens and 20s. We're talking about potentially millions, like drones, right?
Right.
And so how does industry and the government work together to really scale manufacturing or scale those capabilities? I think that's just very ripe for that disruption. Hopefully, with this administration, they look at how do we disrupt the speed in which we can get not just the acquisition, I think that's being done, but how do we accelerate the scale and manufacturability, right? I think everyone recognizes the industrial base. The U.S. is super powerful when it actually mobilizes, so we have to actually mobilize that to the tech that we're actually accepting in from the commercial side.
Right, yeah. Well, it's really exciting to see how everyone's working together to keep pace, and I look forward to seeing what comes out of this, and hopefully we can connect again in the future about
absolutely.
it. Awesome.
Thanks for having me, Sarah.
Yeah, thank you so much.
No problem.